throughout the file. There appears just as I say that. So yeah. So we might kick off then.
Sure.
So welcome to Points, Lines and Polygons. Our guest today, David Carroll from EcOz. Probably said that wrong. I was about to say EcOz, and then I looked at it, but it's not quite that. So you can correct me. So today, from one end of the country to the other, from Darwin to Tassie, and from a cold, as you can see, what I'm wearing, to what David's wearing in the middle of Darwin winter. Welcome, Dave. Thanks for joining us today. For those people who jump on, you can put your questions in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end for people who want to ask any questions. But yeah, today's designed to learn a little bit more about David Carroll and what he does and how he got here. And so I guess if you want to, you can take us back as far as you want, whether that be, what you did at uni, what you studied, and then we'll sort of progress from there if you want to go back that far.
Sure. Yep. My name's David. I work for EcOz. We're an environmental consultancy. So we're the largest territory owned and operated consultancy up here. So we've got about 40 staff. So I studied GIS at uni, which was quite unusual. I studied up here. I went to CDU in Darwin, which is an interesting university. But it was only myself and one other that did sort of GIS as a stream. It was offered as a major through the Bachelor of Science. So that's kind of where I got into things. I ended up doing it mostly by accident. I have always sort of had an interest in IT and data, and it just sort of, it was a mashing of the two. So it was something I fell into and sort of enjoyed from the get-go. I was lucky enough when I was studying to do some work around Darwin. I did a little bit of work with the Northern Land Council in their GIS team, and I got to see what that was like. And then in my last year of university, I did a unit, SID 300, where they place you with different organizations around Darwin, just as some sort of practical experience in science. And funnily enough, I ended up working here with EcOz. And at the time, I did far more of the environmental science side of things. I did some field work. I did lots of things, but I did a lot of GIS. So I worked for them for 3 years initially. And at the time, they were much smaller. There were probably about 15 people, and there wasn't really a full-time GIS role when I was sort of coming to graduate university. So I ended up taking a job in Melbourne with a real estate company. I spent 3 years down there, which was, a good learning experience and sort of doing something different in the GIS space. And then coincidentally was just looking for another job, and I'd reached out to my boss from here and said, look, would you give me a reference? And he said, I'll give you a job instead. So that was 3 years ago, and I've sort of been back ever since. And so the bulk of my career has been spent working in the environmental science space across lots of different things. I work fairly closely with our ecology team, our water team, and obviously approvals as well, which sort of covers mining and the approval side of things. So there's a great sort of variety of work in what I do, and no 2 days are the same, which is always good. So that's sort of how I've ended up here in this moment.
That's an interesting sort of journey from starting in Darwin down to Melbourne, then back in Darwin. So what sort of work did you do for the real estate company? Was it GIS based still in that?
Yeah. So I've spent pretty much my whole career as a full-time GIS person. So when I was working with the real estate company, it was sort of twofold. So one part of it was making maps, and that part of that process was either for pitching on sales. So it was commercial real estate rather than residential. So when teams were pitching on whether they would win work to represent any given building, we would sort of pull some information together, create maps. That job was more the GIS that was being done. There was a larger element of design work because the stuff that was going and being produced was being used in PDF documents, and it was more aesthetic than sort of say what you would create for a report. And the other side of that is there was some data stuff that we did mostly for the teams doing sort of valuations. So childcare valuations is the one I always seem to remember, but I worked a lot with ABS census data at the time, so I still have a good appreciation for that, and the different sort of groupings that they use to clump areas of population together.
And I do find it interesting these days, you see the traditional GIS organizations or organizations that use GIS, and so traditionally they tend to be that land-based and even where you've ended up, then environmental sort of usage of it. But one of the things I am seeing a lot more of these days is in those other industries. I helped a company last year that was a marketing company, and they sold billboards essentially, at railway stations and bus stops, and the big billboards as well. And so it was a great use of GIS, but they'd never used it, and they had lots of data that had location-based information around it, but just never had put it together. And so it was a really good use, and I'm certainly seeing more and more of that these days in those industries, which are good use case for GIS, but not necessarily traditional users of GIS. So after that time in Melbourne, you then ended up back in Darwin, and
Yep.
And so what's a normal day for you in your current role?
Sure. So I wear a couple of hats. Obviously, anyone who's worked sort of in small business will probably appreciate that you end up doing a lot of different things. So I manage a lot of our IT and systems as well as our GIS. GIS probably making up the bulk of what I do. But any given day is usually working across a series of sort of larger and smaller scale projects. So the larger scale projects I'm involved in, I tend to manage all of the data that we're collecting, because more and more, especially up here, we're seeing a desire for especially government clients to want to own that data at the end of the process. So gone are the days where you could just merge two data sets together, leave your attribution really clunky, stick your dots on a map and move on. Nowadays you've got to cross your I's, dot your T's, make sure that the information that you're producing is of a high quality. So a good amount of my time is spent sort of making sure that what we're doing is sensible and that we can use it for our purposes, which is mapping and informing environmental decisions, but also that second piece of sort of going through and then being published to whoever needs to sort of own that data at the end of it and make sure that it's defensible, make sure that we've sort of written down what we've done, how we've gotten there, sort of if there are any gaps in data or if there's any information that sort of needs to be highlighted that's there. But also your sort of run-of-the-mill things, just smaller projects that need two maps made, a map of a mine site. Someone might have taken a drone ortho and they're doing some vegetation monitoring and I plotted on there. My job has sort of shifted in the last couple of years from just putting points on maps, which was sort of the old school way of everything gets put in a PDF, and a much larger percentage of my work now is being done on ArcGIS Online and sort of those more live, malleable systems that we can sort of collect data to. We can continuously reuse that data. It's sort of changed the way that we as a company have gone about collecting information, which has been a really positive shift, and I've been really lucky to be involved in a big part of that, and I've had a really good feedback on it. Like a lot of people have adopted sort of moving away from field sheets, which anyone that's worked in a similar space can probably appreciate that. You go out, you do a week, 2 weeks worth of field work. You're putting everything in notes. Someone has to come back. They have to write it all down. You've got to remove spelling mistakes. That all has to come back to a system. You're spending a ton of man hours. So it's sort of shifted my workload, particular from end of projects where I would get involved maybe in the last 25% to sort of now I'm sort of involved much earlier in the process, which has been a really positive thing. So that and dealing with all of the different formats that people send us information in.
Yeah. So does that mean now, like you said, moving from that sort of that whole PDF thing or way of delivering the maps and the data, you're now able to value add to that whole process, from the data capture in the fields using, I don't know whether using things like Survey 123 or field maps, those sorts of things where, you can then streamline, so you remove some of the, spelling errors or whatever, have drop downs as opposed to free text. But then also then, that end product where it can be more of a interactive web map as opposed to a static map in a PDF.
Yeah, for sure. I think so we use field maps primarily rather than Survey 123. It has been a real positive thing, and I would love to put everything in an interactive map and give people control, but sadly, we're in the business of writing reports and sort of publishing our findings, and that makes sense. And for that, you do need PDF reports, but the field maps has been a real positive because it's given project managers and people sort of managing the jobs on a larger scale the ability to go into meetings and talk directly to the information that we're collecting sort of in real time, so they can see where we've been, what we've collected, maybe any sort of information that they think is important to highlight to clients and stuff. So we've come a long way in sort of introducing that as part of the ongoing process. And for jobs of a decent size, you can sort of set them up in a web map. You can publish all of the layers you're collecting to and all of sort of the supplementary information you need to talk about the project, and that's there and they can see it. And you've kind of all of a sudden given a really good amount of GIS power to maybe non-GIS users, because you set your symbology, you set your labeling, you give them the ability to turn stuff on and off. And for a lot of people, that's enough. It's being able to sort of visualize and see their data is quite powerful. That doesn't always make it through to the end product. Like we still sort of, when we're finishing, we are, spitting out 20, 30, 40 maps, depending on sort of what needs to be shown. But there is that relationship, like there is an expectation that if we are putting stuff on a PDF map, that's information that, can reasonably be expected to be handed over, which I think is a positive thing overall.
And do you find, along that process, you're then able to allow your clients access to that information sooner in the process, because you can produce an interim web map and go, here's what your data is going to look like, here's the area that we're doing, and then they can then, I guess, either QA it or, go, oh, can we change that, rather than you're waiting right to the end and going, oh, we've done these PDF maps, and then you've got to go back and redo them. So
yeah, it's something that I think is probably we should try and do more of. It's a difficult thing between ArcGIS Online and licensing. We've got one project where we are creating views of layers where you can sort of determine which attributes they want to see, and you can set the symbology and they can load it in. They can't edit any of it, but they can see exactly what you want them to see. I think that's really powerful and quite useful. I think it obviously is sort of dependent on the size and how much information you're collecting for any given project. I would love to do more of it, but yeah, like the Esri licensing sometimes makes that a little bit hard, especially between different departments. And one thing we find quite a lot of is, we might have a full-time GIS person and a team, but sometimes the people we're dealing with don't, which can then sort of make that a little bit more challenging. But on the QA/QC, what we found really good recently is the web app experience builder, like the no code thing, has been really great for reviewing data sets, because you can load it in and you can use I know enough about GIS, I can set the filters, I can do the things, and you can build sort of interactive dashboards that allow my co-workers to sort of go through information and say, well, this is correct, this might not be right. You can have them sort of flag things with you that, they might think is problematic in their data sets as they're going. So it's really enriched that QA/QC process, and you can do it straight to the data sets. So, you don't have to pull out an Excel document, have them go through it, join them back on unique IDs, like rather than introducing all of these points where you can have it fall over, that's been really good, I've found.
Yeah. And then that also then helps to bring your colleagues on that GIS journey as well, showing them what's possible and potentially making your job easier if they understand what goes in, what can come out, all that sort of stuff around. So yeah, cool. So what are some of the real challenging sort of things for you and the company working up in Darwin? I guess, it's fairly remote overall and fairly, dry for most of the year and then wet for a lot of the year.
Yeah. So, I mean, for challenges, like the NT is, we have quite a small population, we're probably, I think we are the smallest state. Darwin itself is not particularly big. With that comes some challenges with access to information. Like I was speaking to a Queensland company the other day, and they've got Q globes, so everything's sort of at their fingertips. But in Darwin, like cadastre is not something we have access to. So even sort of finding data sets that are going to sort of inform the kind of work we're doing is sort of an ongoing sort of, you have to know where to find them, and they're in several different places. So that's one big thing that we sort of deal with on a regular basis. And probably the other thing, which is a bit mind-boggling, is like we deal with projects that are 10, 15, 20 times the size of the ones down south, and it's purely due to the fact that the space is there. Like we're dealing with thousands and thousands of hectares as opposed to a couple of hectares, and with that comes challenges. Like you're dealing across multiple different kinds of land systems, and you've got input data sets, and then your data sets you've got available to you are mapped at 1 to 2 million, and you sort of just got to grab them and make them work. So like the size and remoteness definitely adds a level of difficulty to everything we do. But the guys that are out there in the field doing the work do an incredible job. And like conditions are tough. Like we can't use iPads. That's something we learned a couple of years ago, because the screen size is so big it just fries the battery in about 45 minutes. So people are on their phones. People are putting phones in eskies full of ice bricks between sites to cool them down and taking battery packs.
Yep.
But it is a really interesting place, but it can be quite harsh.
Yeah, I did it's going back a number of years now, but I did a project in East Timor, and actually came into Darwin to fly across to Dili, and then and their biggest issue, it was a similar sort of thing, not for mobile devices, because it wasn't sort of that advanced, the project, but just their buildings weren't air conditioned, and the dust, a lot of their buildings didn't even have windows, and so the road dust and everything, and their laptops and computers were just constantly breaking down, just because they were getting so either overheated or clogged with dust. And it just, for someone who's, if you're working in a nice air-conditioned office all the time, you just go, how does that happen? And but then when you're, like you said, the sheer size of the Northern Territory, adds to that complexity. Yes, you might be working in Darwin as a reasonable sized city, but everywhere else is, these little pockets of places where you've got to try and get data and do work.
And then access becomes an issue. Like you've got sites that for half the year are underwater, so you can only access half the site, and for plenty of them, your road access might be up to a point, and then you've parked the car and people have to push. We've had it on a number of projects where they've had to hire a helicopter to fly them to the other side of the site to move backwards, because you spend so much time pushing through the site or traversing it that you actually don't get any work done. So the sheer size of things is definitely a big difficulty for us.
Yeah, and I would think from some sites that probably be the wildlife would be an issue from places to places, trying to avoid the crocodiles. So
Yeah, we have a pretty hefty job hazard safety procedure that people do before they go out. And yeah, everyone's pretty
yeah,
safe, but the
please avoid being eaten.
no, I'm really lucky. A lot of the people at EcOz are very passionate. A lot of the ecologists in particular really love being out there, and these a lot of these guys are out there on the weekends doing the same thing. Like they really love what they do, which makes it really great. It's also a great feedback loop for us because they're passionate about making sure that the information we're collecting, which is sort of where I come in, is good quality and is up to scratch, and they really get on board, which is great.
And I guess that sort of from here. You've obviously been involved with the company as it's been growing. And so is there plans for the company to get, grow bigger, or is the team, like the GIS team, is there plans for it to grow? Or is it, or do you feel it's like at a comfortable level now?
I think it's sort of we have a number of people who are skilled in GIS, but it may not be their full-time role. So like I'm the only full-time person doing it, but we have a number of other staff members who are very good at what they do, and sort of they can jump in and manage their own projects. And their projects might be a little bit smaller, or they might be a bit more specific. Like we have a lady in the water team who's very good at what she does, and she manages her projects, and she's got a really good grasp on it. I think as we grow, there might be scope to sort of get someone else in and sort of share the load a little bit. But yeah, you sort of have to just manage as it comes. Darwin can be challenging to find staff members,
Yeah.
across all industries. It's not specific to GIS. So, if someone comes along and sort of has the skill set and, can be trained up, then yeah, definitely. But I'm not too sure.
And do you find, I mean, obviously with the real contrast in seasons, does that affect workload? So does it get really busy like during the dry season and then tailors off during the wet, or does it sort of stay reasonably consistent?
We're pretty busy year round, but the wet season is probably the busier of the two. So
Oh, wow.
for the water team, a lot of it comes down to like surface water flow. So like whether they
Yeah.
need to be out doing sort of first runoff testing and other things like that. And for the
Yeah.
ecology team, there are certain species that only show up during the wet season, which are your threatened species like Typhonium and stuff. So they're out there trying to find that, and then the dry season rolls around, and we pick up a bunch of other work that needs to be done. So,
Yeah.
there's never a quiet period, but there are definitely times during the year, like January, February, can be really full on for both teams, just due to different factors that stuff needs to get done in a short time period.
Really interesting to know. Like I'd made that sort of assumption that it'd be less busy in the wet season. But when and that's sort of part of what I like about these points, lines, and polygons chats is you start to learn. Like I'm in a nice little work from home environment, and it's there's for me work is pretty steady no matter what time of year, but weather and seasons don't really play a factor. And but for someone like yourself, where those seasons do play a factor, but in different ways, rather than my assumption that the wet season would quieten things down, there's different focus areas during that time.
Yeah, for sure.
And I guess so. From here, where do you see your sort of career? Are you wanting to grow in any sort of ways? Build on sort of things that you're doing within this role.
Yep.
Take on other responsibilities. Where do you see yourself going?
Yeah, for sure. I think I quite enjoy the data side of things, and I've really enjoyed being involved in the larger projects where we are collecting a lot of data. I sort of would like to be involved sort of in a more holistic way to sort of help, drive those decisions around what we're collecting, why we're collecting it, trying to make sure that we're getting all the information we need, and we're sort of not having gaps in our information, but also we're not collecting things maybe we don't need, because that's something sometimes that happens as well. You sort of are going out there and trying to collect everything under the sun, and maybe you don't need it. And then I really do enjoy, sort of following those along and making sure that we're sort of building, data sets that are complete, that can inform a whole project, and that are kind of smooth in the whole thing, taking out those friction points of, this is wrong, or, we need to go back and we need to append some data, or, I think trying to cut down the QA/QC time is a really important thing when you are collecting 10, 20,000 data points at any given time. So personally, I really think that that's where I want to sort of focus in and try and help people do. And obviously on the GIS side of things, because I think that helps across the whole project span. And there is scope for that here, which is fantastic. I've been learning a lot about Python recently, which is great. Py is pretty phenomenal. I would love to learn a little bit more about WebGIS and setting up, because the experience builder is fantastic, but you very quickly hit limitations of like there's something I know I want to do, but I can't quite get there. So I'm sort of just trying to absorb as much as I can, and I think it's part of being part of a small business, is you sort of always have that troubleshooting, problem solving hat on of there's always something that you can sort of make a little bit better, or you can introduce to try and help people, and I really value that. So that's sort of the things that I would love to continue doing in my role.
I do think it's like you said, when you're in a small team, then you can value add or have influence in a bigger way. I think, like when you're in a, if you were working for a BHP or those sorts of organisations which then had an environmental arm, you've got less control over the direction of the business or the direction of what your role is and stuff like that. Whereas I really like that, working with smaller teams and knowing that you can have a real positive impact in what you're doing, and as you said, making sure that end-to-end process actually is beneficial. I have seen scenarios exactly like what you were saying, where you just go, you spend a bit of time at the beginning and go, well, this is the data that you've said that you've wanted to capture, but if we capture these extra few things at the same time, it's not really going to add too much time to the project, but it will give us all these extra products at the end, and we won't have to go back and add to it. And they're the things I think you see as you gain experience on projects. You go, oh, I wish I'd done that, or next time we'll do this. And I think once again, in a small business scenario, you get that opportunity to reflect a lot more about what you've done and how that fits into everyone else. So, cool. Well, I do appreciate your that insight into where you started and where you are now. Did you want to add anything additional about what you do, and anything else along the way?
No, I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. I've done a lot of different things in the MT. I've worked across a lot of different things, so always happy if anyone wants to ask any questions.
Cool. We've got a couple of people on the line as well, Christine and Emeka. So if you have any questions, you don't have to ask a question. That's no pressure. But if you have a question that you'd like to ask David about his role, about his career journey, anything like that, certainly you can either just type it in the chat or just jump off and ask your question. And we've got a few minutes left on the schedule. But yeah, if you've got a question, then please let us know.
Hello.
Hello, Christine.
can you see me?
Yes, yep.
Hi, David. Hello, Dean.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm Christine. Just want to say thank you for taking the time to present. I have a question for David, actually. I actually took a quick look at your LinkedIn page, and I noticed that you transitioned from like the environmental sector to the real estate sector and then back to the environmental sector. You were working at CBRE actually for 2 years.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
that's
so
three,
like,
just under 3.
oh yeah, just under 3. Yeah, so my question for you is how did you make that transition from like one sector to another sector?
I guess the beautiful thing about GIS is it's not like, unlike an environmental consultant where you sort of learn an environmental skill set, our skill set is sort of widely applicable across a range of different like industries. So what I did for CBRE largely is very similar to what I do here. You're sort of working with spatial data and you're sort of fulfilling the same role. You're making spatial insights, you're creating maps and stuff. So really it was just about going from knowing about environmental data sets and land systems and threatened species to learning about populations and different census data sets and how they sort of work together with locations and data sets that I needed for so my role at CBRE, we worked for APAC, so I got exposure to all of Australia plus parts of Asia and stuff. So yeah, it wasn't a particularly the most difficult part of the transition was learning map info. So just
Okay.
like they used a different mapping software, and
Yeah.
it's been a really good thing because I think it has exposed me to lots of different data sets, lots of different softwares. So between industries it wasn't so hard. Just getting involved.
But then like how did you get that opportunity in the first place? Like, did you apply to the job or did someone reach out to you, or like how did that connection happen in the first place?
I just applied. It was just on Indeed. I was graduating university and there wasn't a full-time role for me. Funnily enough here. So I had a pretty frank conversation with my boss and I applied for the job and I did a job interview and it worked out well. They took me on and I moved to Melbourne and did all of that.
Yeah, it's so funny that you did that for a couple of years and then you went back to this company.
I didn't like the cold of Melbourne.
It wasn't the plan, like I was applying to different roles. I applied for a couple of jobs in Alice Springs and Perth and a couple other things, but Ray, who owns EcOz, was, he just made me an offer and said, look, I'd rather you work for me than somewhere else. And, here I am.
So you just kind of like kept in touch with your manager at the time?
Yep.
Okay.
So
yeah, that's such a simple answer. Okay. Yeah, because like, my struggle right now is actually like this transition, right? I was working in the business sector. Yeah, and I want to transition into the environmental sector, but I'm not sure how to go about that transition. That's why I'm asking you. Yeah, because I noticed you made that transition. But I guess the answer is just really simple. Sometimes you apply to Indeed. And if they need a role, then they look at your resume. If you're a good fit, then you get the job.
And as David said, I think the GIS skills are very transferable. It might be learning, it's more about learning, the terminology and the business flow in the different industry sectors. But the way the software works, and that's what I found really quite positive about GIS in general. Like you're not confined to a location or an industry. You can, work across the world. You can, work across industries, and at the end of the day, it's as the sign says, it's point lines and polygons. And what that point line and polygon represent is different for different industries. But you can do a buffer, or you could do have the attributes attached to the points and all those sorts of things. So, and I reckon
that's the beauty.
Yeah, and that's a great question, Christine, because it is, even though David's been able to sort of go and come back to the same organisation, that move to CBRE, yes, a very different industry, but using the same underlying sort of technology. So yeah, cool.
It's really cool. And you're probably using like different apps in different organizations as well, because you said you're using Map Info at CBRE, and I think they also use Esri Enterprise,
Yeah,
right? Like
they do
our
nowadays.
yeah, because I have a friend who worked at CBRE, and she was telling me, yeah, ArcGIS Pro is the main tool that they used for
Yeah, so
Yeah.
business.
funnily enough, when I was there, I worked with an American guy who was just on over in Australia for a couple of years, and he sort of drove that whole move to ArcGIS, which was good at the time
Oh,
because that was not something
you,
they were on board with.
no,
So
really?
yeah,
That was because you worked there from, oh yeah, you worked there quite a while.
yeah,
You
I was
ended,
there a number of years
yeah,
ago.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
so he was pretty big in bringing that across because that's what they use in the US for CBRE, and then but because of that, and because I was sort of there while he was doing it, when I moved back here and they weren't on Arc Pro, I did the same thing. Like you can sort of see the benefit, and these guys were still using Arc Map, and you sort of just encourage people to sort of move along. But I think like here we on any given day we're using QGIS, ArcGIS Online, and just a number of different apps that do spatial things in
Yeah.
different ways. It's sort of to get the outcome that you need.
So you use both QGIS and ArcGIS?
Yeah, because we only have a
Why
basic
would
ArcGIS license.
Oh, that's funny because my previous company, we were like we were scraping location data, right, to use for business decisions, and we initially used QGIS because we didn't have the funding,
Yeah,
yeah, for an Esri subscription, and then once yeah, I guess like once we started making more money, we transitioned into the Esri system, and so that's what we were using. And it's a, I guess it's an easier user experience, but QGIS really has all the functionalities. Yeah, so that's why I was like, oh, you use both?
Yeah.
Makes
yeah,
sense when you have the base model. Yeah.
And I think from a sort of a history point of view, the reason a lot of organizations used Map Info was from that cost point of view,
yeah,
so you had, councils and small organizations using Map Info because, the Esri side was more expensive, and the Esri side is still more expensive, but now you've got the QGIS as an alternative as well. So therefore you're, got organizations who are, looking at both, and sometimes it comes down to what your clients are doing as well. So if your clients are using QGIS and therefore you're going to give them data at the end, then it makes sense to do it in that. So therefore you don't have an extra step where something can go wrong. But yeah, it's an interesting time, I think, with open source, and I think Esri realizes as well. So some of the costing models are getting better. Still not cheap, but better.
Yeah. The thing about QGIS is it really does have more or less all the functionalities that you would ArcGIS Pro. Yeah, it's just harder to use, right? Because there aren't as many tutorials on it, and the user interface isn't as friendly. But actually, QGIS has. I downloaded QGIS's newest version not so long ago, and it's seen some huge improvements over the years.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah, I
completely
would
free.
agree
So yeah.
that it's certainly it's it it continues to grow and continues to be a consideration for a lot of organisations now.
Yeah.
And even big scale organisations. I did a project a number of years ago for Land Victoria, and they went completely open source for this one project, and so that was using QGIS, it was using Postgres, it was using whatever. And the upside, yes, they saved a lot of money in licensing. The downside was that everyone that they employed had to sort of either learn the GIS components because they might have come from more a pure IT sort of side of it, or there just wasn't the resources around. And so it's I think it works better for small organizations. I don't think it necessarily
Yes.
works better for big organizations.
Yeah. You can
Only
connect,
not
right?
from a not from a technology point of view, but just a resource point of view, people who have those skills and how to learn it. So,
I think the other part of that is QGIS also does like because of the model they use where you can have plugins and all of this extra functionality sort of tacked on without an extra cost. I think QGIS is always going to be a part of, if you're part of a small business and you might be an Esri user and you might be like us where you only have a basic license, which is, maybe, it's much, much cheaper than, your spatial analyst toolboxes and stuff. All of that functionality exists in QGIS and it doesn't cost you any money. And I think, it's sort of a positive thing to do, where if you're in a role and you're sort of starting to learn these things and, you sort of hit a speed bump and you go, oh, I don't have the Esri license level for that. Try it in QGIS, like every problem anyone's ever had, someone's had before, or like, the Together spatial boards are great. Like, just ask away. I'm sure someone has the answer. Like, IDW interpolation from, underground bore points was something that came up here a while back, and, we couldn't do it in Esri. We took it over to QGIS and it worked fine. It definitely is that thing where, like, if you do hit speed bumps because of licensing levels and stuff, I think QGIS often is the solution, because you can do things like get a plugin. You can do things where someone's like, they don't need to build it from the ground up. They can have one specialized tool that makes, road center lines or river center lines, for instance. Like, that's a standalone tool. It does one thing, but it does the one thing you need to continue doing your, whatever work it is you've got. So, yeah, I definitely think being able to sort of go between both and sort of know that, like, QGIS can read from a file geodatabase but can't save to a file geodatabase. Like, things like that are always sort of great to pick up, and it does sort of help you in the long run, especially when you're trying to work things out and, rather than sort of getting stuck, you can sort of just plow through.
Yeah, I guess the limitations of having a basic model forces you to get creative, which is a nice thing. It's a really nice thing. And also that, like, beyond, GIS tool, there's also like the world of, Python and Python packages, which is where I am exploring right now, actually. Like, GeoPanda is a very powerful tool, that allows you to do a lot, beyond, like, the QGIS and the traditional, like, Esri tools. Yeah, so that's like a really new world for me right now that I'm exploring. It's pretty cool. As well as R is a tool that a lot of, like, I touched on R back in my applied ecology class in university, and I know it's a really powerful tool for, like, statistical modeling and ecology. Do you use that work at all?
I don't do much in R. Everything I do is either in Python or RK, but we have a couple of remote sensing guys here who just have galaxy brains that are doing things in R that, like, I'm happy with vectors, like, come to rasters, I can use them, but, like, we got guys building these whiz bang, models for different species based on, imagery and stuff like that. And that's really cool. And a lot of that's done in R. So my exposure to it is quite limited, but it is a very powerful language, and it does get used, especially in the ecology space.
I see. So it's like the ecologists and then, like, the environmental scientists that are really using R. Yeah, I remember really enjoying R, and so I thought I would ask you whether you touch on.
And I think it's and one of the key points around that is, there's so many tools, and it's about being open to using or investigating what is the right tool for what I'm trying to do. So many people will struggle or persist with, an Esri side of things and just keep going because it just, that's the tool that they've got. But as David was saying, if you wanted to do river setter lines, you could, download the plugin, and that's exactly what it does. And so things like that, it's being open-minded to the tools that are out there and that are available. So it's very cool.
Yeah, it's probably just treating GIS more as a discipline rather than a software. Like, it's not like everyone who does GIS is an Esri specialist, but
that's a really big realization for me. But you're right. Can I just ask another question? I just don't want to take over the space, the virtual space, because there's a couple other people.
Go for it. And if anyone else, if anyone does have any other questions, then certainly just jump on or put them in the chat. There has been a comment there. So yeah, no, go for it, Christine.
I'm actually curious to hear what you're working on lately. Like, what's your current project? Yeah.
I have to be careful because I think we signed a lot of NDAs on things. We're doing a pretty large scale ecological survey. So a lot of my time is spent sort of dealing with that. So we probably have about 22 layers that we are collecting to that inform various things from sort of threatened flora, threatened fauna, placements of camera traps and their results, vegetation, check sites and full detailed vegetation sites, which then inform, the underlying polygons. And there are some people much smarter than me that are going to sort of do that kind of work. And so I'm sort of mostly involved in trying to make sure they're capturing everything they need in a sensible way that sort of the field teams can go out and collect. Yeah, that's probably the biggest part of work that I'm involved in at the moment. And then that has sort of offshoots where we're trying to share data in sort of live formats. So rather than, pulling entire data sets down, packaging them, having a sort of branching data set, we're sort of giving them, a snapshot view of exactly what it is that we've got. And so that rather than, them having to request it, us having to upload it, they can just sort of go to the live view of it and say, oh, EcOz has been to a part they haven't been before. There are some challenges like GPX data is really hard to deal with. If you are doing more than one thing in a day, and GPX data doesn't hold much in the way of attribution. So we've tried to have to, get a little bit inventive. We're putting it into folders and naming them accordingly and trying to pick that up with a script to sort of say the target species is the folder name and encouraging people to append their initials to the end of it so we can make sure that we're collecting who has got those survey tracks, and then those survey tracks sit underneath, the species points themselves, and people can sort of see, oh, they've been to that area, or yeah, they've been to that area and there are no records, so it is a genuine gap, or there's a gap here with no records, but there's also no survey tracks, so maybe they haven't been there yet. So yeah, a big part of my time is involved with that.
Otherwise, I imagine that's where like survey 1 to 3 comes in really handy.
We use field maps primarily. Field maps for what we do, we found that it worked a little bit better for field collection and just sort of through the workflow that we needed. And that's sort of been a thing that's happened over time. We've touched on survey 1, 2, 3 occasionally in the past, but while field maps is probably a little bit more rigid than our field team would like, a good example is you can't take a point and have like a multi-select. You can't say like there is 3 different species here. You have to say there is 1 species, and then you either need a new line item or you need a new point. And it's taken a little bit of sort of teaching people that it's okay sometimes to drop 15 points and collect 15 records. But it is just a bit foreign because you're coming from field sheets and you're just writing them all down in one go, and it feels like a new thing every time. And I think survey 1, 2, 3 has that functionality, but then trying to take the survey 1, 2, 3 data and bring it back to a format where it makes it easy on the other end is sort of the other piece of that puzzle. So, there's a lot of different people invested in sort of what I do, from setting it up to making sure that, we're doing it in a sensible way. And, I worked quite hard. I have a Python toolbox that I can give people an Excel document, and I can help them sort of design their form, including sort of the drop downs they want to see, so that it's not this long process of doing it all manually, and then the Python toolbox turns it into a file geodatabase with feature classes and domains, so that when we upload it, it's all pretty streamlined. And then from there, sort of they have to go out and collect it, and there's always feedback on things that work well, things that don't work well, and then finally, the client side of things where it's becoming a much bigger part of the puzzle and something that people are getting an appreciation for. But you still have scenarios where people maybe don't quite understand why we're doing something the way we're doing it, and you just kind of have to stress and say, look, like you're the expert in your field, just you kind of have to let me be the expert in mine.
What do your clients? What type of clients does your organization have?
We've got lots of different clients. The biggest clients we've got are probably all local government. There's the crazy statistic. I think that the majority of the people in the Northern Territory work for some form of local government, like an overwhelming percentage of our population, just because of the size of it. But we also do work for private industry, for mine sites, for people who are developing, land. So there's a really great range of work that we're doing and exposed to, and they come with different levels of requirements.
I see. And then as for like the way you divide your workday, are you primarily in the office, or are you spending your time between office and field work? I'm really curious because
No,
I've
for
only
sure.
gotten to work in the office, right? So,
Sure.
I know as fun as the world of GIS is, yeah, I think sitting all day, every single day is not healthiest for our bodies. And I love nature, I love being outside. So I'm just asking all these questions
No, for sure.
yeah, because I'm wondering whether like this sector is the right fit for me in the future.
I am full-time office based. I'm one of the few staff members who doesn't leave, but we have 40 staff members, right? And
Yeah.
there are days when there are 4 of us in the office, so there is a
Yeah.
huge fieldwork component for many of our staff members to go out and do things. And depending on what team you're part of, the work sort of shifts depending. Our ecologists and our water team tend to be the ones that are sort of boots on the ground more often. Personally, I don't mind being in the office. Like I'm most comfortable when I'm behind my desk, sort of, doing things on my computer, as opposed to sort of being in the field looking for threatened species. I can name a bunch of them. I couldn't tell you, but I do think the environmental space is a fantastic one if you would like sort of a mixture of, both office-based work and field-based work. And GIS is a fantastic skill. Lots of people that work here have built a great understanding of how GIS works, and, they might not be, pulling up points and, doing, hardcore spatial analysis or converting rasters or building, full schemas and metadata sheets, but, they can pull up data sets, they can kind of look at them and sort of, query them and sort of say, oh, like maybe some of my data's missing because I've got some points, but my lines don't line up, And I think even at that level, it's a really useful thing for people to sort of have in this industry.
I see. Yeah, I see. Yeah, I mean, I actually took a posture workshop not so long ago, and so I have been told recently that sitting for 8 hours every single day is a health hazard. So I hope you can you and your team can remember to take some breaks in the middle of your workday.
Yes.
Yeah. Take
Yeah.
some walks around the office, around the block, because I was not doing that while I was at my previous GIS job, and I was struggling with back pains that I had to deal with. So it's just a gentle reminder to take breaks.
Thankfully, because I also double as the in-house IT person, I have there's always someone at my door asking me to look at something, whether it be the webcam won't turn on, or I'm up and about a lot. I do a lot of steps, thankfully, but it's okay.
Yeah, because movement throughout the day is very important.
Yes, that's some great advice. And so we might wrap it up there unless you've got any more pressing questions, Christine. But it has been, I appreciate your questions and I appreciate your time, David. It's been a really good insight into your career, where you are, and some great questions on potentially transitioning into that sort of environment. And so we might wrap it up there. Thank you to everyone who's attended. Same time next week. We have a lady who makes maps. Her name is Lizanne Wilmont, and she rides her bike around and captures a lot of points. And I think she works for a council right now, but she does a lot of uses GIS in her both professional and personal life. So that's next week's points, lines, and polygons. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day and great rest of the week. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Gotcha.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
Bye.
Yeah.